Forensics Week 2018. Did you get it right or wrong? Let's find out. There was a lot of circumstantial evidence in the case, but it was just that, circumstantial, and it pointed to too many suspects. So the best place to start is process of elimination. The investigator concluded in the initial police report that the broken clock found at the crime scene would indicate an exact time of death as 12:05. What does that mean for our possible suspects? If we start with the premise that the crime was committed at 12:05, we have another problem. Almost every suspect on campus was in a meeting at 12:05. The only four who weren't were Miss Moorfield and Miss Contry, who acted as each other's alibis, and Miss Setzler and Miss Wild, who again acted as each other's alibis. Furthermore, none of the four had a motive to commit the crime. So let's take another look at the evidence that pointed us to that time of 12:05 as the time of death. This theory of the crime would have it that when the attacker went after Mrs. Henry, they fought back and forth, violently thrashing about the room, knocking a clock off the wall until eventually she turned and smack! The problem with this theory of the crime comes from the medical examiner's report. The medical examiner concluded the lack of defensive wounds indicates that the victim was attacked by surprise and rendered unconscious without having an opportunity to defend herself. If she was attacked by surprise and didn't defend herself, then there can't have been a struggle. And if there wasn't a struggle, then how would a clock get knocked off the wall? So if the clock wasn't knocked off the wall during a struggle, then how did it end up on the floor with the wrong time set? Two possibilities. One, the zombie of Miss Henry rose up from death and changed the clock for no particular reason. Or the killer did it in order to make detectives believe that the crime was committed at a different time than when it actually happened. If the killer took the clock off the wall in order to trick investigators into believing that the murder was committed at 12:05 instead of earlier that day, we're back to having multiple suspects for the crime without a solid way of determining which one was our killer. So let's take another look at the evidence for clues. Because after all, there's no reason to establish a false timeline for the crime unless the killer makes sure they have a solid alibi for that exact time. Mr. Beardsley's witness statement to police gives us the clue we're looking for. He states that by 12 o'clock, almost all of the teachers were back in the meeting, but Mr. Gatlin pointed out that we should be getting started at 12:05 exactly and complained that others should have been back on time. Why was Mr. Gatlin feeling so punctual that afternoon? Because he needed to establish that he wasn't in Miss Henry's room at 12:05 in order to be sure that his alibi would stick. So our killer wasn't Mr. Abernathy after all. It was Mr. Gatlin. Principal Gatlin had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to commit the crime. In 2018, he was our guilty party.